thank you for taking time out tonight. I think when we first scheduled it, we didn't realize that it was going to be going right up against the presidential debate, so maybe there's a little bit of competition for it, for our attention tonight, but we're really grateful to have Mayor Schilling here. The genesis of this came about from, I think, just the ongoing conversations at the city council level around the zoning amendments or zoning code changes that would be necessary to have a pallet village in Burien on the City Lights property, and more broadly, the need for the city to address transitional housing within its limits as mandated by state statute and part of its long-term plans. And so, we have the situation of sort of the immediate identification of the lot in the pallet home village that started in November, and it morphs into this conversation of how does the city of Burien address a more take a more substantive approach to addressing homelessness within its city limits. And so both of those have combined, and so it's gotten a little confusing to keep track of where things are and what's going on. And so we decided that it would be great to have Mayor Schilling here to kind of update us on where things are. And so when we were originally talking about this, we had talked about having Mayor Schilling start off with just some opening comments and any updates that he wanted to share. Then I had crafted a few questions that might be general questions that I think a lot of us have, and then we'd open it up for just some further dialogue. We'll just kind of see where the evening goes, and obviously just establishing good ground rules for discussion. He's our guest here. We want to welcome him to our community, and I know that sometimes this topic can have a lot of different perspectives around it, and that there can be sometimes a lot of emotions that get run into it. And so we just want to make sure that we maintain respectful dialogue as we are engaging in this discussion. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mayor Schilling to have some opening comments.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for choosing to come to this instead of watching Donald Trump and Joe Biden fight it out. I think this is going to be a much better example of civility and local conversations than the presidential debate tonight. As Mr. Moe said, I'm Kevin Schilling. I'm the mayor of Burien, but I'm also, more than that, a local boy who went to St. Francis of Assisi grade school, went to aviation high school, was a teacher at St. Francis, and have many, many friends that attended Kennedy Catholic High School. So these halls are not foreign to me. I took advanced 8th grade math at Kennedy, and also was in the band group that was taught by Mr. Payton here at Kennedy too. So while not an alumnus of this great and legendary institution, I am a friend of the institution and many, many alumni who've been here. So wanted to set that up and say that myself. With the conversation around not just homelessness, but kind of generally the government's response to homelessness, I kind of want to situate it in 3 categories: the national, the state, and the local, because that's kind of what we're working with. We're working with an interweaving of governments and public resources. So let's start with the national really quick. Hopefully tomorrow, and I say hopefully tomorrow because I've been getting up every day for the last 2 weeks at 6 o'clock in the morning to monitor the Supreme Court's decisions and opinions being released. The Supreme Court is still this really ridiculous, archaic institution that doesn't tell you when they're releasing what they're releasing or what they're releasing when they release it. So you have to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning on the West Coast to hopefully get the opinion you're waiting for. So for the last 2 weeks, I've been waking up every day hoping that the Supreme Court is going to be releasing their opinion on Grants Pass versus Johnson, which is the Supreme Court case that asks the question, is it a violation of your 8th Amendment right to be cited or fined for some form of homeless use of public space? So in Grants Pass, Oregon, they wrote a pretty overreaching law that said whether you have any kind of item or visibility of what you would deem homeless, you could be fined upwards of $500. And that's just literally if you are sleeping on a bench. And that's what Grants Pass does. That's pretty overboard. But the question is it a constitutional violation for a municipality or a city to say, you need to please move your stuff or we're going to fine you? That's the question before the Supreme Court. Is it a constitutional violation? The Eighth Amendment says you have a right against cruel and unusual punishment. That amendment was written in 1793 when you would have been drawn and quartered or tarred and feathered or hung or shot for doing something in violation of the law. I think many legal scholars are expecting a Supreme Court ruling to say it is not a constitutional violation, that cities do have some form of time, manner, and place restriction on how they use public space. That is not just what I'm saying. That is what the administration of the President of the United States said. That is what state governments across the board, both led by Democrats and Republicans, that is what local communities have said in their amicus briefs. This is what cities and governments are asking the federal government to allow for time, manner, and place restrictions on public camping. So that's the national view. That's what's going on at the national level. Please wake up at 6 a.m. with me tomorrow to see if the Supreme Court is going to release their opinion on Grants Pass versus Johnson. The state level. Everything comes to cities money-wise that we're able to do anything with through the state, and they funnel it through either their own direct payments to us or through the county. So state government is where we ask for money to do more stuff. We have a limited budget at the city level. We're limited because we rely on sales tax and property tax. The state is a massive government with billions of dollars they take in every year. We need resources and funding from the state level in order to do the things they have asked us to do. There's two words in American government that lots of government officials hate: unfunded mandates, and we get a lot of that when we're told you have to do XYZ thing, but we're not going to help you pay for it. And then we're expected to do a whole bunch of stuff at the local level with like no resources. And that's the case with a lot of cities in King County, where you're a small suburb like Burien or Des Moines or Normandy Park, and you don't have a massive mall that generates hundreds of millions of dollars in sales tax. You don't have the one regional airport that brings visitors into your community and funds everything for you. You don't have Microsoft. You don't have Amazon. You have a lot of mom and pop businesses and a lot of homeowners, and that's like Burien and Normandy Park. Local level. We have a lot of those mandates from the state to build a significant number of houses of all kinds. They measure that through a device they called area median income. They say to you, City of Burien, you need to build X amount of number of units in 0 to 30% AMI. Actually, let's take a guess. What's the area median income of King County?
King County or Burien?
King County.
Oh, I don't know, but Burien's about 85,000.
Area median income?
Annual income?
Yeah.
84, 85,000.
Way high, way too high, way too high.
Way too high?
Yep. King County area median income, anyone take a guess?
Half of that.
Pretty much half of that, $53,000. The area median income is $53,000. So math lesson, you got some math teachers in the room, so math lesson here really quick. What is 25% of $52,000? That's pretty, you know. You have to plan for building homes and housing for people that meet 0 to 30% of that $53,000, if that is the area median income, right? So there's housing that we need to meet for 0 to 30%, 30 to 50%, 50 to 80%, and 80 to 100%. Then throw in the requirements of permanent supportive housing and emergency housing. The county generates a calculation that says, based off your percentage of the population of the county, you have to plan to build X amount of those units. For us in total, for the city of Burien, from 0 to 100% AMI, including permanent supportive housing, and emergency housing, that is close to 5,000 units in total of that level. We have to build, as a community, 5,000 units by 2044.
Okay.
So we have 20 years as the city of Burien, this is a mandate from the state, to plan for the construction of that many units. It's divided up amongst those percentages. But we have to plan to build that by 2044. That includes a certain number of permanent supportive housing and a certain number of emergency housing. That is just what we have to do. There is no debating that. We can't not do that. We are legally required to do that. So permanent supportive housing, an example of that, is the DESC building that was built in downtown Burien. That is permanent supportive housing. That is 95 units of permanent supportive housing. In order to meet our goal as a community for permanent supportive housing is 370 units. So we've built 90 of those units. We worked with Mary's Place to get money for their new renovation that they're gonna do. They're gonna build 90 units of supportive housing. That'll be included. So the city of Burien has already met half of our goal of supportive housing by 2044. So that's for the lowest income levels, i.e. you don't have an income. You have a mental health issue. You have a drug addiction issue. Permanent supportive housing and supportive housing helps with that. So we're halfway through that marker. The highest level we have to build, that no one really talks about, even though it is the highest level we have to build, and by the way, would generate the most revenue, is that 80 to 100% area median income housing. We have to build, the city of Burien is the lowest in its level of median income housing. We need to build 2,500 units of median, 100% area median income housing. And we need to work on that. That's also a mandate. So that's our housing needs across the board. What the classification of tiny homes is, just really quick, and then I'll wrap up so we can move on stuff. The classification of tiny homes is transitional housing. We are mandated also to build transitional housing by the state. The state mandates city governments to plan for the construction of transitional housing. We are mandated to do it. We can't not do it. We have to allow for the construction of transitional housing. We are legally obligated to do that. Tiny homes are considered that. In fact, I'll just explicitly say the state statute says you cannot exclude transitional housing from any zone where how residential housing is allowed. That is the state statute. That's what we have to go off of. What we are allowed to do, we are allowed to do some form of requirement around acreage usage, size, and what is or is not permitted on a property. So those are things we can do, okay? Right now where we're at is we have a very high profile situation around the county saying you can have $1 million and 35 pallet homes. In November of last year, the city council voted and said, sure, we will take the $1 million and the 35 pallet homes, and we got to figure out what to do with it. The county told us that before going through any of the actual processes in place you have to go through in order to do a project of this kind in the city. They just sent it to us and said, take it, instead of going through the process that we started in January, which is sending something to the Planning Commission and getting the Planning Commission to say what can or can't happen and to determine if the land that's being potentially used is suitable for this purpose. So we started that process in January. So a little bit of news making tonight, that I received an email from the county a couple of hours ago that said they no longer want to give us the $1 million and 35 pallet homes. So they're not giving us the $1 million and 35 pallet homes anymore because we're going through the process that they did not want us to go through the process of doing. Even though my stance has always been I would like to go through the proper process and have a plan, I do not want to be a mayor of the city that I grew up in that allowed for something to happen that did not go well, or that was not fully planned out, or did not go through the proper process. I owe it to the community, I owe it to the neighbors, I owe it to everyone to ensure that we have not just a fiduciary responsibility, but a responsibility across the board to go through the legal policy process of determining what works and what doesn't work. If it takes time, it takes time. I don't make the rules of what time it takes. I just want to go through the proper process. King County decided we were taking too long. They have now since removed the $1 million and 35 pallet homes from our consideration of what we can do. That's some news tonight. What that doesn't change, and what we're going to go into a conversation of, is the fact that we still need to plan for transitional housing. We still need to plan for emergency housing. And we still need to figure out what that looks like as a community. And we're doing that right now in the city council. We're going through those conversations at this moment. So after this conversation, I would like to ensure that you all take motivation from this conversation and write a letter to the planning commission or write a letter to the city council. Trust me, we read them. This is not a massive city. We're not full-time, we're a part-time city council that makes $650 a month. That's it. Basically a volunteer position. And everyone reads their emails. And everyone reads who writes the emails to them. So please, I encourage you to email the city council and the planning commission of what you'd like to see for emergency and transitional housing. So happy to go into that deeper conversation of what we're talking about tonight, but that's setting the stage.
So I think the obvious first question is, given the fact that the identification of the Seattle City Light property for the use with the Pallet Village was tied very specifically to both the availability of the 35 pallet homes and the $1 million. What does that mean for the council in terms of its formal action and the possibility that some other source of funding, some other entity comes forward with ideas as it relates to that particular parcel of land, which obviously is owned by the city of Seattle?
Yeah, so that's I'm gonna say about that again.
Yeah.
So I like the saying. So that's a really great question. I feel very professorial, which I feel like I should have done with my life, but somehow I got into government and politics. My mom wishes I was just a history teacher, not just a history teacher, because I love my history teachers, and I would love to be a history teacher, and I think I should go and be a history teacher. I'm making myself laugh.
You're right.
But I'll say this. So we have to create the zoning. We live in a country where you are permitted as a developer or as a nonprofit or as a religious entity, you are allowed to submit a permit use request for land. If it meets all the criteria associated with the zoning and planned use of that space, you can build what you want to build. We can't stop that from happening. So if you're a developer who wants to build tiny homes on this property, which will soon be allowed for residential use, you would just have to make sure that your transitional housing that you want to build meets the requirements that the local governments have put into place for transitional housing. We are right now developing those rules for requirements for transitional housing. It has not been fully determined yet because we're going through the slow, boring process of government. And that's the one thing I've learned over my 5 years of being in a city council is that this is a slow, boring machine. One of my favorite political scientists named Max Weber said that. He's a German political scientist, and he called government a slow, boring machine. And boy, was he right. And that has its pros and its cons. Its cons is that it takes a long time to get anything done, and that's why people are frustrated with government. I think a pro of that is that we take our time to figure out what's the best thing to do, and that we get community buy-in, and that we get people on board, and we're not rushing anything through. So with that, to answer that question, technically this Seattle City Light property could still be used for transitional housing. Yes, because the zoning changes that we'll make within our code states that transitional housing has to be allowed in any place that residential housing is allowed. Technically, on that street, not technically, legally, on that street, residential housing is allowed anywhere on that street, on any parcel of land. So a lot of the question is, we were talking about this beforehand, a lot of the questions up to Seattle City Light. What do they want to do? They own that property. That's their property. There was just the weird back and forth of what was going on with King County and Seattle City Light and the city of Burien, and there was a lot of backroom King County politics going on there where they were trying to force Seattle City Light to push something faster. A lot of people who aren't from Burien or who are not elected in Burien trying to do stuff in Burien, and that was a very weird, aggravating situation. And so that's where we're at. So we're working on the transitional housing code right now for the city, and as I've said, you have to allow transitional housing wherever residential housing is allowed. However, the things we are allowed to work on are spacing, what type of buildings, requirements around usage, but we can't say no to transitional housing.
So I'll do a quick follow-up, and then I think, because the other questions that I had kind of pre-prepared are somewhat moot. So the most recent version that the council was considering. So obviously the transitional housing zoning code amendments have been in process from February through now. On June 3rd, the city staff presented sort of a cleaned up version of something for the council to consider. And there are three parts that I think would raise challenges about the use of the Seattle City Light property, specifically for transitional housing as it related to the proposals. One was the density cap of 35 units. The second one was the prohibition on adjacency to certain types of public good entities like schools or parks or things along those lines, that there was a 500-foot restriction. And then the third was the limit to acreage of the lot had to be within an acre to 2 acres. And you didn't want something so small, but you didn't want something so big as a city, was what was being proposed. That though all those things still seem to be debatable points, there seemed to have been a general sense of the council that that was where it was, and then it got sort of tabled and sent back to the attorneys for review and will be brought forward at some point in the future for discussion. So kind of where's your thinking that each of those restrictions are in terms of, because I think that's where the starting point of discussion is, that's what's on the table.
Yeah.
And so you'd have to go through amendments. I believe you'd have to go through the formal amendment process and Robert's rules. So if you can kind of explain where those things lie, and then we'll open it up for.
I love this because everyone's getting a primer on local government, and the thing about it too is I want you to never have to worry about your local government ever again. Like this is my biggest goal over the next 2 years, is for you to not have to worry about what the local government is doing. You should not have to pay attention all the time on what your city council is doing. We should literally just be making sure the lights stay on, the fires get put out, crime is taken care of. We are letting builders build. We are letting schools be schools. I don't want you to have to worry about what the city government is doing. I want you to be trustful and at peace that your city government is doing the normalcy of government. Like that's my goal for the next year and a half. And I think once we're through this situation, because this has been an abnormal situation, very rarely, if ever, does a bigger government step into a local government the way we have had that situation happen from the county into our city. This is very rare. This is not normal. And we have had to do a lot of figuring out how best to navigate in those waters, right? And one of those navigations we've had to go through is this amendment to amendments, to the legal team to review the legal side, to the planning commission to review the planning side. And the things that were brought up over the last period of time, it is now in analysis of the legal side. So we're having the city attorney check to make sure everything we're doing is in bounds with state law. And if everything's in bounds with state law, my prediction is we're gonna do what's in bounds with state law. And I think what the risk and the concern is there, if we do have something like a buffer zone, I think a buffer zone, the concern there, and I'm of this opinion, I do think a buffer zone violates the state's requirement to allow transitional housing in residential areas. You can't say you can't build that there if the state law literally says you have to allow the building of that there. But what I do think we're gonna do as a city council, if you've watched this issue, you'd see that the majority of city council is on board with doing something that does not put pressure on a school, that does not put pressure on daycares, that does not put pressure on libraries. And so one of those things would be the type of services that are allowed. I think just like what we passed with the tiny homes when we did vote to accept the $1 million and 35 townhomes, was a request to ensure that that money would go to services for drug use, mental health concerns, occupational support. So I think we'll see some of that. It's just incumbent on the legal team to tell us what is and is not in bounds of state law. And I don't really want to preempt that right now. I will say that I think, based off conversations that the city attorneys had with us, buffer zones I do think are kind of maybe off the table. I would lean to say it's probably off the table. But that acreage requirements are not, and that building style and type are not, and that service type are not. But we can't do something that violates state law. We just can't.
So I think I just open it up for
Yeah,
questions,
that's
for other questions at this point.
So I'm Christina. I attended about 5 of those meetings, and actually they took the Bellevue and Mercer Island restrictions, and there was a buffer zone, so I know it's state approved.
Yeah, I think the issue here, and I'm just gonna be so honest,
Absolutely.
the B-Town blog and Burien News are here, but I don't really care. I think there are so many eyes on Burien, and there's so many concerns about the potential of legal action, just because we are being targeted by a lot of people who, I literally saw today, Burien was written about in being cruel to homeless individuals, cruel. And I think that we're trying to figure out a way to do what we need to do for the community and do what's best for our neighbors, both people who are in a community or folks who are sleeping in tents. We need to do what's best for everyone who's being impacted by homelessness policies. And I think we're just tired of being in the legal spotlight. I'm not gonna say we're not gonna do that because I don't speak for the whole council. There's 7 of us, you need 4 people to vote on something. So I'm not gonna speak for everybody. But I think we're kind of tired of being picked up. Maybe people should sue Bellevue.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Can you stand up and say, like, you're already doing it, but I'm just trying to be outside the box. So here you are, being tired and picked on, and you still get the opportunity to make the right choice. Like, I can be tarred and feathered every day of my life, I still get the choice on how I'm gonna react.
Yeah.
And so do you and your council.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is, no, I'm not gonna join the council, and I'm gonna support you in still making the right decision for your community, because your youth is your future.
Yeah, and I think you're gonna see the majority of the council make that vote, I think.
Well, I just wanna speak, I've been emailing one of your nice council members who is very worried about, there's the 2 places, is it
Mary's
Mary's
Place
Place
and Hospitality.
And so my thought, as an outside council, I'm not a council member, but just part of your community, is you can grandfather in those 2, but then make the restrictions that are fair for the upcoming projects that you have to abide by the state rules and regulations.
So there has been a lot of conversations about what we need to do to protect Hospitality House and Mary's Place.
Correct.
Because nobody wants to see either of those organizations in trouble or have to do something different. Because, to say though, Hospitality House and Mary's Place are both in residential neighborhoods.
Right.
They're both in the middle of residential neighborhoods. One is literally in a church.
Yes.
One is down the street from a school. It's right next to St. Bernadette's. So we have two examples of transit there, and they are classified as transitional housing.
Yes.
So we're in a space where our two examples are right where the state law would let them be. There's I don't know exactly because I'm not the city attorney, but there is a legal concern with the idea of grandfathering in versus writing the law now that applies to them and works with them for everyone else too. So whatever law we would need to write that fits the transitional housing style of Mary's Place and Hospitality House, to do that aggressively. And I think that, but I think the conversation is going to be a good one with the city. The city council is eager to do what is best for the city.
And the Oasis Church was an example of a failed attempt in the sense that it was not high barrier, which is what your concept is. However, I'd like to see that in the rules and regulations, that it remains a high barrier.
So Oasis Church also, if there's interest in hearing a little bit about that, is not transitional housing because it was not housing. It was people in tents in the backyard of Oasis Church. They never applied for a permit. They chose to shut down on their own. They did not receive city funding, so it was not transitional housing. That would not have qualified in what zoning is allowed for under the state law. What happened at Oasis Church was not transitional housing and would not be classified.
Gotcha.
You have to build something, a structure, in order to be considered housing. Yeah.
So I know you're.
And just remind me your name, sorry.
Thank you.
My name is Elsa Raffle.
Hi.
I was born and raised in Burien.
Awesome.
Great, I have a freshman starting here.
We talked to you at St. Francis. I told him I did too.
Yeah, he's very good.
Don't be too embarrassed.
This is great, you're interested in being.
Thank you for being here.
So, what's the timeline for finalizing the zoning and the planning decisions? When can we expect that will be?
So it's coming back to us on July 15th, which is our next meeting after the summer break. So it's coming back on July 15th, and that's when the city council will either vote on exactly what the legal and planning team brings back to us, or we'll make additional amendments.
Okay, and so King County has revoked their money and their 35 pallet homes that were proposed for this location, right? Which is in question, still may or may not be able to meet the requirements, right? But let's say it was approved to go. Do we have the money to immediately start building on that location or any other location, or what's the timing that we would expect? If a location could be determined, and whether it be there or in my backyard.
So I also want to say this about the process that would have taken
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah,
So whatever would have happened if it were to have happened was not money that would have been ours, and it was not operations that would have been run by us. There is this misconception out there, put on by King County, that this would have been a City of Burien program and process. None of it would have been. That would have been $1 million that would have gone to KCRHA, and KCRHA, this is a lot of acronyms, so King County Regional Homelessness Authority, would have taken that money and they would have put an RFP out, a request for proposal, would have put an RFP out to a provider to set up and run those 35 pallet homes. Never once would the City of Burien ever have taken that money, owned that money, been able to use that money for anything else. It would have gone to KCRHA and they would have done it on their own. Which, by the way, is the email that I received today that the King County said they're going to do anyway, which is give it to KCRHA to use for their own stuff. Which I'm like, that's what you would have done anyway. Linda, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, I don't know anything about the $1 million, but I do know there's tiny home not pallets, everybody uses that word, tiny homes that are built and ready. But nothing, I know nothing about the funding.
Yeah, there's tons of different, there's tiny homes that are built and ready, there's the pallet style tiny homes, but this we wouldn't have known because KCRHA would have been in charge of the process get a provider and have a provider
Yeah.
run.
So I guess what I'm kind of asking is, so even if it's not this site, which everybody here is really concerned about this site
Mhm.
because it's so close to school, is it gonna happen somewhere else in Burien regardless, right?
It
So
has to.
so it's going to happen somewhere is what I hear you saying is mandated.
Well, what's going to happen?
We're gonna build housing
Well,
of similar type that was talked about for this.
I just want to be really clear with
Yeah.
defining terms. I have a master's in history, all I do is define terms all day long. It drives me nuts, but I want to do
Well,
it.
I heard you break it down for the different groups.
But I want to say this,
Yeah.
we are not building anything.
Oh,
We, the city of Burien are not building anything. We, the city of Burien, are planning for, are establishing the plan for
right,
stuff to be built.
right.
We wouldn't be building any of it. Private organizations, private developers, private builders would be building it.
So July 15th is when you're gonna talk about the final zoning,
Correct.
okay? And that will determine where, if not there, these different types of housing might be.
Well, no matter what, transitional housing will be allowed in any place residential housing is allowed. Because that is state law. Yes?
What other types of transitional housing are there besides tiny homes?
Yeah.
Tiny homes, shelter space, so homeless shelters are considered transitional housing. I don't know what the exact technical term is for some of these, so bear with me for a second. Permanent supportive housing is not transitional housing. So like a DESC is not considered transitional housing because it's considered permanent housing. A nonprofit that runs a place if you are trying to get sober is transitional housing. A nonprofit that runs a place if you are in between jobs and don't have a lot of money and you need a place to go to find a job, that's transitional housing. And there's like one or two more, but there's not that many kinds. It's mostly tiny homes, vocational, sort of come in and get what you need if you're down on your luck kind of houses.
So Tent City is not transitional.
It's not transitional housing.
But to go back to Christina's question about, in your amendments, do you have control over the operations? Are you able to have a place behind barrier, any type of transitional housing when you're coming up
Yes,
with that? You
and
can.
so we've already asked the city
That's
to
great.
prepare language almost exactly like what Bellevue has, because Bellevue has language for this. And that's what you can do, and that's, knowing this council, that's probably what we're gonna do.
That'll help a lot.
Thank you.
Do they
Yes,
have-
sir, let me go over here,
Okay.
yes.
I figured out my question then.
Moet.
Carl Moet, yep, thank you. So maybe just to narrow that question down a little bit. So this, we had an event here with that specific funding, and that funding has been removed. So does that mean the event of putting a tiny or a pallet home is now closed? And then we move on to start a new project of how to meet the obligation?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, essentially what we're doing is we're establishing the foundational rules that governs.
So you're starting a new now?
Yeah, this is the process we always should start with.
Right.
What the county did last year was not the correct process. They knew it, they did it anyway. And we should all be mad about that. Your local government was basically being told to do something by people who were not elected to do those things in the community.
Okay.
And we should all be annoyed by that.
So, but that part is now closed because the funding's gone. So now we're going back to your normal business operations of governing.
Yes,
And coming up with your standards.
yes.
Okay.
That's exactly what we're doing. We are right now, normal procedure, coming up with standards, coming up with requirements, expecting whoever comes in after we've established those requirements to meet those requirements, because they have to. Wherever they end up doing that though, because that's wherever they have their money, that's where they have their resources. So, yeah.
And I'll just chime in, and sorry, I just want to chime in to push that point a little bit more. typically, like land use, changes in land use come before the planning commission through a normal, or like, you wanna put up a big fence. You know, sometimes you have to go before and make sure, if it doesn't follow the zoning code, you request a variance or something along those lines. So moving forward in this normal process, Seattle City Light owns that parcel of land. It's zoned residential, it's about 5 acres large. If they wanted to sell it to a developer, if they wanted to partner with someone to build something on it, they still are gonna have to put forward a plan of, sort of a plan for the use of the land. It would have to go forward to the planning commission. You'd have to prove that it is meeting the zoning code. And then you would also then have to follow all the neighborhood impact things and all these other types of, whenever you do anything, and build on undeveloped land, you're gonna have to make sure it's not violating any environmental standards. So there's a whole process that would be required prior to that use, all of which had been circumvented, but now that's off the table. So yes, technically could Seattle City Light partner with a nonprofit organization, build transitional housing on there, potentially if the code allowed for it, but potentially not.
Yeah, I think ultimately what happened is that Seattle City Light was thrown into the middle of this without being prepared for it, because it was not their plan to use that lot for anything other than their long-term use of utility stuff. I can't even remember what they said they were gonna use there, like storage almost. But then they were thrown in the middle of it because a county council member said we should do it there, and then all of a sudden it became the topic of conversation. Now that the county's removed that, I think it'll kind of dissipate a little bit. Because it was not anything the city of Burien directed at first. I mean, neither were the tiny homes or the $1 million. That was not something we submitted an application for. It was just shoved at us in the middle of an election. And then they wrote some stories about it. Do you know what you're doing?
I did, and I think some of that happened because there was a member that used to be on the Burien City Council, since voted off the Burien City Council, that was in cahoots with King County to bring that transitional housing here. That person who's since been voted out, and now it seems like the Burien City Council is, I don't wanna say lockstep, that's not the right word, but you guys are more like unified in this is what we're gonna do because this was best for the city. And you don't have someone that's on your council tearing the seam apart.
And at times directly undermining.
Correct.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Monica, and then over here.
Yeah, no, it's just a question you might not know the answer, but reading.
But I'm gonna try anyway.
Yeah, no. But reading back, I remember reading some articles that Kennedy tried actually to do something on their property, but could not improve their stadium or the field because of some environmental issues on that adjacent property. And I just kind of wonder, it never came up, and like, is there an environmental hazard or,
Well, a
issue?
whole lot of stuff has not come up that I wish did come up or does come up. But there's people who write articles are people who choose to write articles about what they want to write articles about, and I can't direct the press to write articles I want to write
Well, I just
about.
remember that based on that, and I don't know the details that Kennedy could not actually improve their field.
And I don't know the details either. I actually think that predates.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
does.
yeah.
I mean, I've
Yeah.
done enough discussion about it. There's a underground water stream that's part of the salmon habitat that touches on our land and then goes right outside the field fence line. And so
All of Burien's in that area.
yeah, and so it prevented us from putting you see on the football field, there's a scoreboard, and if you actually try to use the track, it's an 8-lane track until it's a 6-lane track. Because you had to put the scoreboard in 2 of the lanes because of this mitigation. And so,
When did that happen? What year is that? I don't know.
They always decided you to run in lane 7.
and so it is like, once you get towards 509, there are just things that have to be factored in. on the other side of the fence, on the Seattle City Light property, there are things that they'd have to consider if they were to develop all the way up to the front fence line. So that's the most I know. We just never got far enough into the weeds, literally and figuratively, on that issue.
I did South End Saints when I was at St. Francis, and no one put me on the running side of things. I did shot put for good reason. Did you do South End Saints? Do they call it that anymore? No, that's too bad. That was fun. But I think the answer to that question too is we were told no by last year by the county when we wanted to use certain properties arbitrarily. That then when they wanted to use certain properties that also had some issues, they didn't mind that, but it was what they wanted. So again, an issue of an unelected bureaucracy coming in and telling us what to do when we're the elected body, anyway.
Yeah, I think the bottom line here is that it's gonna happen somewhere, it's just a matter of where. So it may not be there, but it's gonna happen somewhere in Burien.
What other prospective properties?
Yeah, that's
have
what I'm curious about.
Well, that's the thing, it could be any, I mean, so if we make a acreage usage limit, and we say you can only build transitional housing style on no more than an acre. So then it's any property under an acre that you can build. Any in residential. Again, though, stuff has to pencil out. So like, we're talking about this as the theoretical nature of what can and cannot happen. But at the end of the day, stuff's got to pencil out. And what the county is finding and what the state's finding is they can throw money at this problem. But a lot of nonprofits and a lot of builders are finding that this stuff doesn't pencil out. And so you'd be hard pressed to find more than 2 or 3, and that's why you see like literally only 2 or 3 organizations doing almost all of it. But that's also why you see those 2 or 3 organizations have stories when they've run something for like 4 or 5 months, come back and say, we don't want to do this anymore.
I'm curious to see what happens with the enrolling Burien, the DES.
Right.
Yeah, DESC.
The Bloom side or whatever.
Yeah, they're calling it Bloom side.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, we have to build permanent supportive housing, and this is the largest chunk of money in the nation for housing, and this comes from HUD. This is a federal requirement. HUD money prioritizes permanent supportive housing, and the reason why it's built is because HUD generates billions of dollars for permanent supportive housing projects nationwide. That's why, like, we kind of see permanent supportive housing being like the thing we read about all the time. It's happening in Seattle, it's happened here, it's happening all over the country. That's because HUD funds it.
So who's going?
Also, what's your name?
I'm Julie Redinger.
Hi.
Tracy went to St. Francis.
Yes, she did, yeah.
Yes. So I see that building and it looks beautiful. Is anybody living there?
They are living there.
Who's
So-
living there?
We required a local placement of priority Burien individuals, or people who designated Burien as their home. And we required the first 30% of people to be people who designated Burien. That Burien priority designation is full. 30% of those beds that were prioritized for local placement are, I was told today, are in. But these are individuals that go through a process called coordinated entry. You guys are gonna have a lot of homework to do tonight. It's called coordinated entry. It's how the county selects individuals to be placed into permanent supportive housing. It is not a first come, first serve, I wanna live here. It is, you have to be on a list, in line, having worked through a social worker or some kind of service provider, and then you get in. It's how King County does it. Everybody says coordinated entry needs to be revamped. It totally does. It absolutely is not getting people off the streets and into available rooms fast enough. No doubt about it.
So the people that are now residing in the parking lot next to the police station,
Yeah.
are those people, do we know if those people are interested in that or not interested? Because when I drove by the other day, I mean, frankly, I saw things just driving by.
Oh, they're peeing in the pond.
I mean, yeah,
So-
what's going on there?
So some of those people could be on a list in line to be put into permanent supportive housing in Burien or somewhere else. They could be. I don't know. I don't even know if King County knows because people are showing up all over the place all the time lately. Not just in Burien, I'm talking about it
So is the
regionally.
building full then, now?
It will be full, but every bed is designated to a person.
There's a list and people are moving,
Mhm.
we just don't know where they're coming.
Well, they're getting the people who are in line from coordinated entry into the beds.
And so that's what we need to build more of?
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the federal government funds lots of money towards the building of that. We are directed by our housing goals to build another 150 units of permanent supportive housing, a little bit more.
And the land that's down off 152nd, where, I don't know, the grocery store used to be down there. and
Back of
apartment
Pumpkin
complex,
Patch.
Yeah,
All of
Aiden's
that?
Wayne's Way.
Oh, okay. Mhm.
Is that all just off limits because of the airport?
That is port property.
Is it because of the runway and they can't live there because there's houses like right, like a block over? I mean, we can't use any of that.
That is port property, and when we were looking and asked about it, they said no.
Ask again.
I
know,
ask,
I know.
I ask everybody every day.
Close to my house.
I ask everybody, oh, hold on,
There.
so you had your hand up, and remind me your name?
Michelle.
Michelle, you had your hand up, Michelle, and then you had your hand up.
All
so
I
we'll go
want
here,
is
and
a
then Linda.
definition. I
Sorry.
don't know what I just want a definition that a couple people used, and that's the high barrier thing.
Yeah,
What is that?
no drugs.
Oh, okay, it's
Yeah.
just requirements.
Rules.
Yeah,
then.
it's rules.
Rules, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I wish we moved away from low barrier or high barrier, and we moved more towards requirements, expectations.
Yes.
Because I think that starts the fight over that term of low barrier or high barrier. Because a lot of people in this space will say, you cannot have high barrier, no one would ever take it, you can't get them off the street because they'll want to still do drugs.
Yeah.
But so that's what a lot of advocates say, but the advocates on the high barrier end say, well, but you gotta get them off drugs in order to help them get a job and other things they need. I'm a big fan of saying we kind of need to do both. Like we kind of need to say you're suffering from an addiction or a mental health illness. You're not gonna be able to get a job or have a maintained life if you don't get help for that problem. But we also need to find something that's stable for you where you're off the street not in a tent anymore. So it's kind of a meeting in the middle that we have to meet. But people want to fight. They want to still fight. They don't want to just say we need to do kind of everything all at the same time, which is possible to do. Linda?
I just wanted to say with the DESC, I can't remember, did we get a certain percentage that were also veterans?
Yes,
And do you remember what that percentage was?
30%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I know you fought hard.
So
for that.
30%. So the things that I really pushed when I was going through was the veterans and the local placement. So I wanted to make sure we had priority for Burien people, and I wanted to make sure we had priority for veterans too. Veterans, I think also, they're working really hard right now to get the veterans in because the VA just has they've got everyone you need. I mean, the VA's operating a huge homelessness outreach program right now, federally.
Okay, I know other people have questions. I know back to why are we fencing in that campment? Can you explain
Okay, so
to me, just like, it seems like I just want to understand, are we gonna do anything about that, or are we just gonna let it play out, or?
So we're defining our terms really quick here,
Okay,
because what do you mean by we?
I'm saying, who fenced it in? That's like we're saying, okay, you can be here, so I.
King County,
King
King
County,
County did.
okay,
because that is property owned by King County.
okay.
So King County established the fencing around that property for that purpose. That's what
They're
they did.
calling it, they're saying it's okay to camp within.
That is King County doing that on their property. I will also say that King County has closed the district court public bathrooms because they've been experiencing problems. But when we've asked for support for our King County Library / City Hall bathrooms, we haven't gotten any.
Well, you talk about all the small businesses in Burien, right? That we are local people,
Mhm.
local businesses. It's really hard when you want to support them, but you're scared to be in Burien because of these people. And when you go into these stores and they're boosting and drinking and eating and showering in the aisle, I mean, I feel bad for our local businesses. We're not, so King County owns that property, they're allowing that to happen there, but our local businesses are struggling with this, right?
I know.
So Burien businesses, so how are we Burien, you the mayor of Burien, supporting the local businesses that are right around that encampment that are struggling?
Well, we've been supporting them. I mean,
Yeah,
we've
so-
had grant money for all these situations. We've asked for the police to do enhanced patrols. We've allocated more money than ever before in Burien history to human services funding for homelessness outreach, homelessness support, eviction protection. $2.9 million in ARPA money that we allocated to human services funding. And we got our brand new outreach service provider on the ground now. For 3 years we have that funded. Never has Burien had more human services money allocated for a problem. And we need to start saying that because everyone's making it sound like we're not doing a single.
Well, we don't know, right?
Well, I know, but that's why I'm here to tell you.
That's why
And that's
I'm
why you can go tell all your friends.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now, I don't like asking hard questions. I wanna ask.
I can handle it.
Okay, I wanna ask about your 6 o'clock in the morning problem, but first, you're saying that the city of Burien is committed to making the transitional housing, I guess, other than drug and alcohol rehab centers, which I don't know if we have any, but you're saying everything's gonna be high barrier.
No, I'm not saying that.
You're not.
No. I'm saying that the council still needs to discuss that.
Okay, in your discussions, my understanding is to get grants from HUD, which you say are so important, HUD requires low barrier.
For permanent supportive housing.
They do.
Yeah, for permanent supportive housing.
Like DESC.
Yeah, like
What you're
DESC.
trying to build, okay, all right. Now, your 6 o'clock in the morning thing.
Mhm.
So you mentioned 3 cities, Burien, Des Moines, Normandy Park. All great cities. Burien's business district, now in the neighborhoods we have fences, car alarms, dogs and guns, we're okay. But the business district is being absolutely destroyed
Yep.
by these zombie criminal drug addicts. Now, in the city of Burien, they're pitching tents everywhere again. They're shoplifting our businesses, especially on First Avenue and 152nd and some parts of Van Bonn. They're shoplifting our businesses out of existence. Like we just lost the Rite Aid, if you didn't notice.
I know.
Okay, so.
Well, but we'll get back to that in a second.
Well, anyway, what happens in Burien is we're overrun with drug addicts. You don't see the same thing happening in Des Moines and Normandy Park, because if you go into Normandy Park and you pitch a tent, you're gone in a day. And they take your tent, they throw you in jail for a couple of days, they let you go, but they destroy your tent. That's what happens in Burien. What is the law that they are enforcing in Normandy Park and in Des Moines that we won't enforce in Burien? Because without your, tent camping ban, great idea, totally unnecessary. Camping in public is illegal in the state of Washington everywhere except for state parks and some of our beaches and some logging roads. Totally illegal, and that is the law that they actually enforce in Normandy Park and Des Moines, but we don't enforce here because Dow Constantine controls our police and he wants to warehouse all the drug addicts in Seattle in Burien. The last thing in the world he wants is for the cops to enforce laws on shoplifting, defecating in public, pitching tents, sleeping on the streets, and all the other things they do that are making life very difficult in Burien. Why can't the Burien police, other than the fact that they're controlled by Dow Constantine, enforce that law, which is it's absolutely illegal to camp in public? That's the law that's enforced in Normandy Park and Des Moines, but absolutely not enforced in Burien only because Dow Constantine controls our police. Solution.
So 2 things really quick. Rite Aid.
Go on.
Rite Aid left on its own.
it got shoplifted out of business.
But it left on its, I've talked to the owner, they left on their own.
Because they got shoplifted out of
And
business.
the owner's using the building to put AutoZone into. There was a plan for a long time for Rite Aid to leave and AutoZone to move in. So I just wanted to say that. I don't really care. If you think it's shoplifted out of business, you can think that. I don't really care.
Talk to people that work there.
I know, but I don't really care.
I
They moved and Rite Aid moved on their own. I talked to the owner. The AutoZone's moving in there. It's been a plan they've had for years. You can think what you think about it. That's fine. You can think what you think about it. I don't really care. I know what they did. It's okay.
That part of
But-
the area is a war zone.
Okay. So the second thing, though, the answer to your question about why that law's not being enforced is this a simple answer: is that we don't have our own police department.
Yeah.
And that our entire police department is the King County Sheriff's. And this gets to our whole issue around regulations of tents and enforcement of drug laws. We don't have our own police department. It is entirely directed and run by the King County Sheriff's Office, which 2 years ago, the King County voters decided to not have an elected sheriff, but to let the sheriff be directed by the county executive. So the sheriff's department is not the City of Burien Police Department. They are sheriff's deputies that answer to the sheriff.
And Dow Constantine does not want the police to chase the drug addicts out of Burien and back into Seattle.
So today, though, the King County, this is other news, I guess, the King County Sheriff's Oversight Committee, which is the committee of every city that is a part of the interlocal agreement, which just is a fancy way of saying every city that pays money to the King County Sheriff's Office to be their contracted police force. Today, at the behest of Burien, the King County Sheriff's Oversight Committee has requested, and they agreed to this, to renegotiate the interlocal agreement with the Sheriff's Office due to what was going on in Burien. So they are going to move forward now to renegotiate that because we don't have money to start our own police force. We do not have the money to have our own independent police department. There's no other option just with the money we have.
Too bad we can't take the money from all the fentanyl busts that we've been making
Yeah.
and put it towards that.
Well, it goes to the county.
Right.
Well, there's no problem.
Yeah. So anyway, so we don't have our own police department. We contract with the Sheriff's Office. And the situation we've had in Burien is that the Sheriff's Office has decided to enforce or not enforce laws, depending on whatever day it is. And that's what we're working on. Yes?
I just wondered how it's going with getting a new sheriff.
Well, I don't know about the, you mean police chief?
Sorry, chief.
Yeah, so,
Sorry.
I was like, I don't know about sheriff.
I misspoke.
Our police chief. So the police chief, who's been police chief since 2019,
Yeah.
is going to start a new job. He's going to become the new police chief for the city of Des Moines,
Right.
which is interestingly not in the sheriff's department. And he's someone who's worked in the sheriff's department for 20 years, and he's a rank of a major. I have a lot of respect for him. I think he's done a really great job in the city of Burien, and I think we should all show him a lot of respect. He's making this decision on his own to leave the city of Burien and go to Des Moines. Totally up to him. That's his decision. I just think it's interesting. It's a city that's not within the sheriff's department. Yeah. And especially with all this stuff going on. So that process is beginning now of us finding a new police chief. We'll begin those interviews. It has to be someone internally with the sheriff's department. But I think what I've talked to the city manager today about is that we get the ultimate decision. So we get to decide out of the final three candidates internally within the sheriff's department. But we get to choose.
But it'll still be a Dow Constantine employee.
We'll still be a King County employee. So
It'll be controlled by Dow Constantine.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, the sheriff's not elected anymore, directed by the county
What's going to
executive.
be different with enforcing your laws?
Hmm?
What's going to be different with the new sheriff, the new chief? What's going to be different about enforcing Burien?
You've already answered that question. It's my 6 a.m. problem.
Yes.
That's what will be different.
Yes.
But the federal, I know there's a decision in front of the Supreme Court about this, but you don't need that law.
Hold on, but we do. So let me explain this really quick. So the Supreme Court's making a decision on if it is constitutional or not constitutional to ask someone to move their tent. That's the decision of the Supreme Court. We are being sued by the Sheriff's Department. They are suing us in federal court to not have to enforce our law because they are claiming it violates the same amendment that the grants pass decisions decide.
But what about the state law about camping in public? That's been law for 70 years.
They're not putting it in state law, they're putting it in federal law. Plus, they just don't want to do it. I mean, the answer to it is they don't want to do it. They're not doing it. They did it for 3 months. They did it for 3 months, it worked for 3 months, no one had an issue for 3 months. In fact, this was a law that we crafted with the sheriff's office, with the police chief. This was in collaboration with them. They did it for 3 months, and then they just decided not to. So, yes,
So, this is Julie again.
yes.
So we have King County supporting us because we don't have the funds to support our own Burien Police Department. True.
Well, we pay them for
Pay
the
them.
contract.
So why don't we partner with Normandy Park and say, thank you, King County, go away, and partner with Normandy Park and build our force with them?
The very non-political answer is that they don't want to.
They don't want to. Ask nicely.
We are a big city, they're a small city, we're a big city. It'd be a huge,
But we're so close. I mean,
I know.
it's such a close community.
but it would
and
be a huge
we
service
have all the restaurants and all the grocery stores.
that they come to anyway.
Right. So why are we not like really
We've asked,
sucking up to them?
we've asked. And it's that we're too big, we have too many problems, they don't wanna, I mean, they'd have to hire a lot more people. They'd have to hire a lot more people. And they're a small city, Normandy Park is a small city. Small staff, small community. In the back,
For example, just to add to that, do you know,
wait, what's your name?
Dan,
Hi, Dan.
how many officers are in Normandy Park and how many officers does King County typically have in Burien in a day? I mean, that might just be your example.
On a day?
Like today, how many officers are on duty in Burien, King County?
Yeah.
How many officers are on duty in Normandy Park?
There's 3 shifts of 4 in Burien, 3 8-hour shifts of 4. And there's a thing called a swing shift when those hours overlap, like 2 others come on, so at minimum we have 4.
Right, okay.
And then if we have something going on that requires a bigger response, the other cities that are contracted with the sheriff's department, like SeaTac or
King County
White
can
Center,
do
they'll
that.
come and help out.
Right.
I mean, even down in South Burien, if Normandy Park's doing something they need help with, we'll go down there and they'll come up and help us out. So, like when I did my last ride along, I went into Normandy Park because they needed more help for something that was going on.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to,
I don't know, so to answer your
make sure
question,
that, they got 2 on probably.
yeah, they only have like 2 or 3.
Right.
Maybe not even, they might only have 2.
Yeah, that'd be a huge thing, I understand.
Yeah.
To take on.
Improve that police force to.
It'd be huge. So geographically, it makes sense for us I mean, I just have to think practically about this. It makes sense for us because White Center's the sheriff's department, SeaTac is the sheriff's department, and then it just makes geographic sense where we need the support from. It also is the cheapest option. And it will remain the cheapest option, unfortunately, until they get the change they need from the courts. So,
When they get the Supreme Court
yes, ma'am.
decision,
yeah, well, hopefully tomorrow.
when they do, will the King County officers in Burien start enforcing the law?
Well, it'll be determined on what Judge Jones decides in our federal court in Seattle. That's why I think he's waiting for the US Supreme Court to make their decision before he does anything. If you were a federal court at a lower level, why would you want to get ahead of your bosses? I don't think you would. So he's doing fine. Yes, ma'am.
So it's tangential to that, but you talked about the fact that the revenue base, right, for Seattle is mom and pop businesses for the most part.
For Burien, you mean?
For Burien, sorry. For Burien, it's mom and pop businesses and then residential. So the question I have is sort of from an economic development, are there other plans in place that then also help, that are part of this zoning question potentially too, that thinks about how to build that revenue base to be in a different line so that then we can have some of these things, maybe you don't have the airport, but like, are there plans in place that also then help the city think about the long-term nature of what do we have to accomplish and how do you raise that base? Because this is just gonna be a question.
Remind me your name?
Michelle.
Michelle. Thank you for the question. The city council gives me, I'm able to talk about a good thing. The city council passed 2 meetings ago our 10-year economic development plan. No one wrote a thing about it on any news source or press. Looking at you, B-Town Blog and Burien News, neither of you wrote anything about it. But we passed our 10-year economic development plan that calls for an expansion of not just mom and pop businesses, but advocating for hotels, advocating expanding for our wellness corridor, advocating and expanding for constructing that higher level AMI housing and multifamily housing at a faster pace, advocating for innovative ways of redesigning the downtown core to meet the needs of kind of the growing, what's the workforce looking for? They're looking for places to not just have an office, but like a meeting and gathering space for businesses and companies. We're advocating for manufacturing hubs. We're looking for more ways of attracting people for our port proximity. We just put that out. It's our 10-year economic development plan. It will, if everything goes according to plan, raise revenues. It will, if everything goes according to plan, add thousands of new jobs to the city of Burien. And what do jobs do? They bring people who buy houses, they bring people who go shopping, they bring people who have families, who go to schools, that pay tuition to come to the schools, and things like that. So we just passed that. It's a big, bold plan to grow Burien. I'm super excited about it, and I hope you are too, if you take a look at it.
You have to make it safe for people to go to work. So like people that work at Bartell Drugs in Burien or Big Lots or Safeway, right?
Mhm.
I wouldn't want to work there. I wouldn't want my kid to work there. I wouldn't feel safe. I don't think they're safe, so
Our downtown core is dying.
it's scary, right? Small businesses in Burien are struggling.
I don't think anyone in here is
So-
debating that.
I think it's gonna be a real challenge to build more businesses in Burien with the way that it is now. So,
And please come to city council and tell that to everybody.
right?
Because no one's debating that, no one's denying it. This is a really tricky time. And I think for the first time in a long time though, you have a city council that's trying to fix it. And you have a majority on city council that really loves this city. You have a mayor that grew up in the city. And I'm sure as hell not gonna do anything that's gonna hurt it. And so I think that like these frustrations have been built over a long period of time because there have been people making decisions for a long period of time that like are not listening to this concern, or don't go and listen to Safeway, don't go and listen to the downtown core. So please show up and say that, because you can say that here to me and I'll hear it, but we also need you to show up to city council and say it to city council.
And I think that's probably a good place for us to kind of close out, in the sense of, regardless of what happens on the Seattle City Light property in the short term, intermediate term, long term, it's clear that the conversation tonight has talked about much bigger issues as it relates to the city of Burien. We're part of the city of Burien. Our community has been a vital part of this city for almost 60 years.